Hello, everybody. I'm Prakriti Manyar, and I have a very raspy voice right now because of the party season, so forgive me for that. Welcome to the first recording of the Purple Corner, which is our digital community setup, or other community channels across offline and online activations. We have, after many months of trying to schedule, finally found a common ground with Reshma, who is author, erstwhile investment banker, writing coach, and I know many other things: singer, guitarist, foodie, traveler.
All of that is true hobby.
True hobby. We're primarily going to talk about two of her novels, actually, the latest of them, but she's written two, Fade into Red and the Hidden Book One of the Hidden Children series, and also a non-fiction ISB portraits collection of
ISB
stories.
Portrait and the new book that's come out, which is The Lost Prisoner,
The Lost Prisoner, yes.
which
So
is
that's
the hidden children.
yes, the Hidden Children series. That's yeah. So we're going to talk about that. I'm also going to touch upon like writing as a career, writing, coaching, and just all your many hobbies as well. Thank you so much for making the time. I know we've had a bit of an up and down situation with it, Reshma.
Okay. Hi. Happy to
So
be here. Let's start.
yeah, I'm going to dive straight in to go from my latest project. We go backwards from there. But I was so happy to come across the series because for long I just spoke to you before we started recording. I spoke to you about how I felt a cultural disconnect by reading primarily Anglo-Indian fiction. And I was so happy that the Hidden series kind of fills that void for why young adult fantasy magical literature. Similarly for Fade into Red, because I felt that good romance is also not very well done in India, and I have my theories about it. But that's still somehow that's a genre that we either it's either very formulaic or not written with the kind of sensory, I would say, flavors that come with a romantic read. I want to understand how you gravitated towards writing both of these genres, and kind of were you always a reader of them? What were the kind of influences on you as you were writing both Fade into Red first and then the Hidden Children series?
So I think both of them came from very different parts of my brain and very different parts of mm, spectrums of who I am as a person as well. So, so you said erstwhile investment banker. From the so My career started at the Hindu. I was a financial journalist for the Hindu business line. So I started writing then full time. It was a full time writing job, right? So I was taught how to write good reportage because I was a research analyst, not a journalist, which means I did a lot of long form writing. So I used to travel to a lot of places and write about industries in a great amount of detail. After that, of course, but I was very keen on becoming an investment banker, primarily to earn lots of money. And so I went to ISB. I did all of that. And about 13 years later, I got very burnt out. And I was about 33 at the time. And I started traveling a lot. And because it was like a peak IB time, everything was doing really well. So there were a lot of deals in the market. And we were traveling extensively in the job. So a lot of places, cross-border, New York, Prague, Vienna, very, very what my husband calls the Gabriel Alon Daniel Silva spy lifestyle. So, but I was working the entire time. But what I used to do is I was getting very burnt. And every time I went somewhere, I'd try to haggle or hack a day for myself in the city that I was in. And I started then using that time to walk around the city. I'd never been to New York, so I spent a lot of time walking around New York. I'd never been to Prague or Vienna or, the back roads of Britain, like not London, but, small manufacturing cities and towns. And so I started writing about all my thoughts when I used to write. And I started doing a lot, and I walk a lot. I'm a big walker. I think having lived in England for a large part of my life, they walk a lot. So walking is just a thing. You just walk, right? You wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to go and I'm just going to explore. You do that for 5-6 hours, and you tend to, when you keep going back to cities, because it's work, you keep going back to the same cities, you tend to do your walks, and your walks get a bit deeper. And I started to write about the walks. I then sent a couple of these write-ups to a very well-known writer called Sonia Faliero. She's a very, very well-known, well-rounded writer, and not necessarily a good friend, but an acquaintance that I really respected, and a friend. So we used to hang out socially. And she turned around to me and she said, you know, you can actually write. And I don't say that to a lot of people. You can write. You know how to write. And so I said, okay, then let me just do a little bit more of this. So I started building up a whole portfolio of little stories. And when I started writing, and I then went to Italy for a very extended period of time on a deal. At which point I got sick and tired of the deal. And I started writing a story about what would happen if a girl like me fell in love with the man she was working with. Right? I said, you know, why not? What would happen if that happened? And that started to become a story. Like it started to develop into and I completely used my life as a template. Right? So she was South Indian, she was a Tamil, she was a Tambram, she was working as an investment bank, she was practically living in the same apartment. I took elements of my life and wove it into a story. And I sent it out to a couple of people, mom, my friends, and they were like, what happens next? What happens next? At which point I decided that I couldn't do this job anymore. And that was happening parallelly. You could, what do you call it a quarter life crisis, I suppose, not midlife because I was in my early 30s. So I think a quarter life crisis. And I said, I can't do this anymore. I have to quit. I've been working since I was 19 years old. So it was 19 job, it's not a my husband keeps saying we're Gen X and we are patronizing. It's not patronizing, but real jobs, where you're like working 12 hours a day for 15 years of your life. And I said, I can't do this anymore. I've earned the money, I bought the car, so let's go. So I took all my money and I went traveling. I quit the job. I said, this is a sabbatical. And I went back to a lot of the places I traveled. And so solo travel for about 2 to 3 months. And I spent a month in Italy, harvesting wine, etc. And then I wrote the book when I was there. And simultaneously wrote a number of pieces and so obviously I got introduced to she was lovely enough to introduce me to editors and they picked up my pieces. So a lot of my travel pieces started showing up in India Today Travel Plus, National Geographic, Harper's Bazaar Travel, Hindu Travel. And so I made walking tours my niche. Everywhere I went, I wrote about a walking tour because I love to walk. So I started like, in phoning those in or emailing those in to from wherever I was. And I became a travel writer, albeit paying for my own way and not getting paid that much either, but using savings to have a good time and write and learn the art of writing because I was totally self-taught. I don't have an MFA or anything like that. The book finished and I would say not lucky enough. A book finished and I sent it to like 15 agents. I got 15 rejections. And then the last agent, who's a very, very powerful Indian agent, picked it up. Her name is Meeta Kapoor. She's from Siahi. She picked it up very quickly and sold it very quickly. Because I think it was a sort of a boom moment for, I don't like the word chiclet, but fun romance, romantic comedy literature. And so that sold bizarrely to a Random House, Penguin at the time, or Random House at the time, but now Penguin Random House. And I was like sitting on this book and I was like, what do I do with the rest of my life? I didn't expect, I'm not interestingly enough, not a romantic, I was reading a lot of Sophie Kinsella at the time, I have to admit, right? So I was in that zone of reading a lot of Sophie Kinsella and reading a lot of really bad Nora Roberts, and I mean, I love Nora Roberts, okay, so I will not trash her. Nora Roberts, Daniel Steele. I was in that zone, so I think it came out. But I'm not that sort of reader generally. I'm more Game of Thrones, very dark John Connolly, Stephen King, Robin Hobb, fantasy, dark fantasy, low fantasy, high fantasy, J.R. Tolkien. And then I'm like, what did I just publish? What did I just get published? So when the publisher asked me for a second book on that, I said, I don't think I have it in me. I think that was it just came out. I finished it, it came out. And when my friends read it, they were like, this is fairly autobiographical. I said, yeah, because it's a lot of it. And I think a lot of readers and a lot of writers do that. The first book is essentially everything they want to say about the world or whatever came
Yep.
out.
Yep.
But then I am going to you I'm going to essentially echo what you're saying, what you said earlier, in that growing up, I felt a complete lack of cultural representation in what I read. And I only realized the influence it had on me when when I was in my 20s and my 30s, and I couldn't relate to anything that was mine because I had been fed a diet of European and American rhetoric and context. So much so that reading any context, anything set in my own context was so alien to me and so unrelatable. And I thought that was very, very dangerous. And it upset, and I started taking, so to promote Fade into Red, funnily, I don't know how this happened, but I started hosting writing classes for children at Baodaji Lad Museum and Kala Goda and all of that. And in the process of that, I found that kids had the same issues. They were reading same books that I'd grown up on, some more books, Harry Potter that is very dear to me, from a Robin Hobb to Philip Pullman to all these incredible books. But when I asked them to create characters, they were always Shirley or Diane or Ellen from Chicago, from Oxford, from New York, from Boston. Some were happy enough to set it in Poland. And when I asked them, why are you not setting it in India? Because now you see, I'm older and I'm getting defensive. Because I'm older and I'm living here and I'm defensive, despite the fact that I would have done exactly the same thing. Why? Because I was raised on a diet of books. Those books, of course, can do the same thing. I don't think Indian kids are, I grew up thinking Indian kids are not cool enough, that they don't go on adventures, they don't have crushes, they don't have cool parents, they don't even have shows they can watch. And I said, I want to write something I would have liked to read as a 13 to 14-year-old, but not preachy, not messagey, no message, no preachy, and no agenda. Agenda-free writing. The problem with a lot of Indian young adult writing and Indian everything, actually, we have this issue across books, across age groups, is that we're unable to find non-agenda writing. And children know when they're being preached or when there's an agenda very, very quickly. So let's say it's about bullying. You cannot tell them this book is about bullying. And you can't make it very dark either. So what happened is it was a lot of it. And so I said, write a book with no agenda, no message, about a girl. Write a book you want to read. And what are the books that we want to read? We want to read about girls and boys in deep, lasting friendships, having fights, talking to each other, and going on adventures, trying to fight their inner insecurities, and everyday life, where SATs or their exams or the boy or the clothes or the food is the beginning and end of their life. That's it. no agenda, no concept, no focus on racism or religion um, or anything. Yes, there are issues, but my book is not meant to solve issues. My book was meant to entertain. And in that, show kids, give themselves a context they can relate to. That's it. And so I said, why not write the book I would want to read? And so essentially, I wrote a book I wanted to read. I wanted to create a beautiful world for them that was non-religious, that was non-epic based, that was not. And kids like witches, kids like magic, kids like. And yes, the witch is not necessarily a Western concept. We do have them. We just don't have them enough in our stories because they're not part of our epic stories. They're part of our folklore. And our folklore, unfortunately, is not put in the right context for our kids. So I said, let's go back to folklore. Let's go back to nature. We do have a lot of that. We have witches, we have shamans, we have a lot of tantric. So I read a lot of tantric, you know, literature. What happens in our Kala Kitab? What is our other side of our our religious ideas? There is, there's a lot. So I started reading a lot about it. Simple. Started reading a lot of our own ghost stories, especially based in Cal. And that's why a lot of it is set in Cal, because I went and spent a lot of time. I did a massive Nat Geo piece in Cal. Oh, don't worry. I did a massive Nat Geo piece. So Nat Geo commissioned a massive piece about Cal to me. Again, they wanted a really beautiful walking tour through Komartali. Sorry, to and through, and they wanted to the Blacktown. They wanted to go through Blacktown, etc. I said, okay. When I went there and I spent a lot of time at the Park Street Cemetery, I love Cal. And so I was like, let's have a really nice, dark, witchy, world for this girl that is really rooted in who we are. So create enough history going back and forth. I love Celtic history as well. So let's mesh the two, create our own agenda, create our own world, create everything from scratch so that children can feel like it's theirs, despite it being a Western trope, which it is. So it is a Western trope, which is our Western trope. But nobody said a witch can't be in a sari, a witch can't be eating vadas or samosas or hilsa or chicken curry, or because it's not like our children are still our children. They're still eating chicken curry, they're still eating beans, they're still eating, cutting chai, they're still Indian kids. But they need to be able to see those things in a cool, fun, adventurous setting and thinking, oh my God, yeah, this girl's just like me. She goes to school just like me. She has a pinafore uniform. She has grounds. She eats lunch under a tree in some schools, or she eats in a canteen. Cool girls wear kurtas. They're beautiful. They have long, pretty hair, but they're brown and they're dark. And they have frizzy hair and they wear glasses. And yes, it is set in a, it is set in a English world, which is what I'm used to, which I grew up in. So I said it in the world I grew up in. But I wanted that world because there is a large chunk of kids who don't get to read it. And I think that it's sad that they don't have that representation. And that is why it's done well. And they're like, oh, wow, we are cool too. And so that happened. It took a while because I wanted the world to be very, very, deep. And I like quantum physics. I was reading at the time. And I was on sabbatical and was on a long sabbatical. So I could do a lot of the reading that you otherwise don't have time to do to build a world that was deep enough. So that's how the Hidden Children happened. ISB Portraits happened primarily because I'm in from ISB and they needed someone to write it. And, and I love profile writing. So, that's what happened. But yeah, so they both came from very different places. And I think that The Hidden Children is probably more me than Fade into Red. This, even though I'm quite happy to write anything, as long as I'm having a good time. But yeah, so that's the genesis of that.
That's lovely. I have so many things. Like you said, that relatability. I realized that I didn't know amaltas, but I knew rhododendrons, even though we never have rhododendrons in India, or at least in parts where I've generally
There are
visited.
children who have never seen a scone in their life who are, are reading about scones, right?
Yeah.
When, yeah, I exactly. Um, or chikkus, they don't, why isn't there a chikku in their vocabulary that is in a book?
Yeah, exactly. And, everything you've said, like, really
They don't know
resonated.
where the Nigris is.
Yes. And like
They don't know where
animals,
the Nigris is.
we don't have raccoons. Why are you writing about raccoons?
They don't know where the Nigris is. They don't know that,
Crazy.
yeah, they don't know where the
So,
Nilgiris is. And that's why I put the Nilgiris in my book.
which is so strange because the natural world is the one you inhabit, but somehow that is replaced in our heads
Because
with,
of the books they read.
of course,
And
of course.
kudos to those publishers and those authors and that publishing industry where they're like flooding the market, and as they should,
They
because
should.
children have access to anything they want to read. But we should
Yeah,
also give them they're reading manga. So
yeah.
much manga, right? Again, a completely different cultural context setting. All I hear from booksellers when I go into bookstores, Madam, आप manga क्यों नहीं लिखते? I said, because I can't write manga.
Right,
But
manga.
what is it about manga that is so appealing? It is because, again, it's so beautiful. It's written, and yet we're not able to do the same thing with our comics. We're not able to recreate the craze for manga. But it's what do they? So it's a, again, we have there's so many issues when it comes to,
Yeah,
yeah. So,
yeah.
but
But
I
no,
very
I
much
mean,
stay away
completely.
from the epics.
Yeah, completely resonate. There are a few things I thought about, like as you were speaking. Um, I guess research is one aspect of it, but you moved primarily from writing what you know, and you know as a lived reality. Let me say it that way. Walking, whether you're writing about your walking tours or whether you're writing about, kind of this what if life of Fade into Red, to moving to writing, not just, I would say, writing non-linearly. One, because a multi-part series means
Yeah.
you're going to go back and forth. You're going to have continuity kind of issues and challenges to deal with. So one, writing from fairly linear, like linear narratives of travel, or a romantic read which has kind of a start and an end, to writing non-linearly, and writing perhaps primarily what you don't, you may have wanted to see that reality, but you haven't necessarily lived it, and yet you see that's more you. So as a writer, how do you kind of approach that switch, from these two very different writing styles, these two very different narrative arcs, and how do you keep tab on it? Like, one part is, of course, the creative aspect of it, but the second is also the very logistic aspect of keeping your notes, if you're writing over many years across geographies, across kind of concepts, stuff you've borrowed or been inspired from different kinds of readings. So one is the creative part that I'm very interested in understanding, and second is simply notes. How do you keep a track of stuff?
So let's split that into two. And even the first one, I have been brought up on a diet of of the Hidden Children, right? So the diet meaning I live and breathe Tolkien, right? So for me, um, the world, like for instance, I struggled to not bring magic into Fade into Red. I struggled to not make it dramatic. I struggled to not make it edgy. There were parts I really had to pull back, and say, this is not that type, because that my writing naturally veers towards that, right? I am not, so because I went through a phase of reading that, um, but that doesn't move me, right? What moves me is a John Conley. I would struggle to write anything not supernatural. So that's number one. I will find it in everything. In everything I write. Even in my nonfiction writing, I will always focus on the supernatural elements of that place. I will focus on the uh, what I call the beautiful darkness of anything. All right. So that is my nature. And so what happens then is it's always going to be like that. Right. So that was not, so that world, that magic, that reality is very easy for me to get into. I don't require anything to get into a fairy tale setting ever. Okay, that's number one. I don't want, if you ask me to, like, watching a movie like The Hangover is something I would do because somebody else is watching it. Like, so, that's from a, not from, that's from a mind space. Yeah. So moving away from, second thing, creatively, how do I keep track? Um, one from a one creatively, I tend to write. I don't know how many writers you know. We spend a lot of time not writing. Yeah, which people don't get a lot of time for, like, it's for 5 hour period, of which 2 hours will be spent looking out of the window. People think you're daydreaming, and you are, but what you're doing is all the information you have is being sorted out all the time. So if you ask me, how do I move between characters and spaces and things, I actually have, and I really need to fix that, have very little written down. It's really all in the head. It's just that it's in the head so much because you keep rethinking it, that it's there already. Now I do have some parts written down. I mean, there are, because it's so much of it is a world building is fresh, that yes, it gets confusing even for me, and some parts I do, and luckily I wrote a Bible for a TV show. It's with a director. At that point I had to actually catalog everything, so I have that to refer to, which is, I love the fact that I did that. But from a creatively, one, the linear, the non-linearity, I tend to write each uh, when I plot on a wall. I have a massive wall. I plot on that wall. So I have chapters, scenes in each chapter, and I see it visually. I kind of see it, and that takes a long time to do. Once that happens, everything else is very free flow for me. But that said, if there is something in the past, I tend to try and finish that past story in one go. That movement, I split it up later, but creatively, I follow her story. I kind of know what's going to happen to her in the end. And to put all, and I do that with all, especially with the Lost Prisoner. I had, with the Hidden Children, I had two parts, which was, one was Abba and one was Shui. With the Lost Prisoner, I have 3 parts and almost 4, and I think they will only increase as time goes, because in fantasy, you can't, fantasy is like a movie, really. If you look at all the movies, all the good fantasy, you have things coming in from all ends, and you have the big finale. And if you don't, very few books are one, even though it's a first person book, there you want to see a lot of the second or third person, third, you characters, leaders like it. And I always tell people, and I tell my students as well, that a lot of the first drafts are for yourself, but a lot of the subsequent books, remember that you're trying to entertain your reader. In the end, you've written what you want to, but now you've got to make it palatable for someone to read it. And so what do they want to read? And as a reader of a lot of fantasy and dark and horror, I kind of know what I want from my books, and I try to give that same, I want to be able to read this book. I want to So if I don't like it myself, there's no way somebody else is going to like it. So that's the so essentially I finish that storyline and then I start on the bigger storyline. But I do go back and forth to make sure that I'm still feeling a lot of the emotion going back and forth. So there is that build up. I can't lose track of the build up between the three storylines being woven together, because if they're too separate, then they're going to sound separate, if you know what I mean. So it has to be seamless. So for that, I still need to write them together. I can't write them in 1 month and then go back. So I do write them every day. I just tend to look at, I have it in, even though I'm writing different parts every day, I still have them in one linear fashion, 3 linear, and then I bring it all together. So if that helps. Notes wise, as I said, I have a wall. Yeah, and I think I don't know. I think I need to do a better job with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Notes wise, I think I need to do better. But I do have a lot of research books. I have 20 to 30 notebooks.
Oh my God.
So all those notebooks which are illegible writing will have a lot of the stuff I have once written, and I keep going back to those notebooks to find stuff if I'm missing anything.
It's still a
That's
longhand. That's just curiosity more than anything. Still a longhand writer of.
I do both. So a lot of the large scenes get written longhand because you can't match the speed, and they're illegible. So what I'm doing is just putting it out there. So if you want, just throwing it out of my system onto paper, and then I go back and I will rewrite the whole thing on the laptop. At which point I have what I call a base on paper that I cannot understand. But having put it out there means that the brain already understands what's going on. So then it comes out.
You
And
can
all the
internal.
convers
Yeah,
yeah,
you can
internal.
internalize it much better when you're writing it longhand, I feel, and then recreating on
Exactly.
laptop is just
Yeah. Yeah.
much
So
easier, much fluid.
so that said, I am having a problem where I don't understand what I write anymore. So I'm moving to another portable typewriter sort of situation, which also mimics a little bit my longhand. It mimics my longhand, but I cannot write directly onto a laptop. I have to do a lot of prep, a lot of longhand, a lot of mind mapping before I even reach my computer. Because
Yeah, that seems to be. I mean, I face the same. I don't write as much creatively or nonlinear stuff, but even if I'm writing like slightly long form stuff, I'm just like, I can text it to somehow, but I cannot write it on the laptop. So I often like just text it to myself or something,
yes, no,
um,
yes,
and then just shift it to the laptop. There's some distance between the
yes, there
desktop
is a
and
distance. A lot of people don't understand and don't realize why I tell people, and because of my classes, I tell people that their children need to write on paper, and they don't get it. But there is a distance. There is a distance, and you're not able to bridge that distance on the laptop. I don't know why. It could also be a
yeah.
bias, and I'm confirming that bias by talking to other people. It could be that too. I am. So
No, you mentioned the teaching bit, right? And I really want to get to that as well. The hidden imagination workshops, right? Um,
yes,
yeah. So
that's my day job.
that's your day job. Okay.
I have to,
Okay. Lovely. So like you kind of spoke about how you got into it. You know, you started just like as a way of promoting Fade into Red and talking about yourself
yes.
as an author. And since I loved how you touched upon some of these things of the kinds of that approach of relatability, making representation cool. That's one kind of, I think, approach or a philosophy of teaching that I clearly see that you follow. Uh, Stuff like writing longhand. What is like one is we know how much reading and writing helps in the overall I guess, cultural development of a person. But do you face resistance from kids now? Um, uh, do you see that there's a difference in just not, and I don't mean by speaking their language or the fact that they're digital natives, but is there a resistance to connecting with themselves at that level that perhaps we didn't have because we had far less, um, you
Traction?
know, pardon?
Are you saying are you asking me if they're more distracted?
They're more distracted and they're less, yeah, just like doesn't it doesn't quite stimulate them maybe the way it did
No, so
us.
I think, okay, so uh e- one, so a lot of parents come to me and say that my child doesn't like Enid Blyton, and I don't blame the child at all. You cannot give a child today Enid Blyton. My daughter doesn't like it, right? So whereas she will still read a Roald Dahl and be really happy. Yeah. There is, yes, the kind of writing they consume has changed, and it should change because a lot of the old writing was had many uh, I'm not going to name any names, but there was, it was why it was it was white, it was not diverse, it was the language was archaic, sentence structure is archaic. That said, reading A Wizard of Oz today is still all of those books, Tolkien, Robin Hood. I don't. I Kids are incredibly smart these days. They are smart. They are exposed to a lot more. They have a lot more access to better quality books. They are, so I think it's unfair to say that they are. Uh, there are all types of kids. I think just that we know a lot more types of kids now. They do have a little less patience than we did, primarily because of the fact that they are able to get they are they are unable to look for information. They don't like looking for information. What that means is that, yes, you can go and ask Google for information, but in the process of looking for information, you learn a lot of things. That's something they're missing out on. Apart from that, I really see no difference. If anything, technology like Zoom has made access to everything a lot better, and therefore children have access to things that they would have never had, that we never had access to, uh, from a literature perspective, from a cultural context, from exposure, all of that. I don't think there's I just believe that they're not writing as much. Primarily, yes, it is distracting. I think there is access to screen time, but are they reading less? I don't. There were kids who didn't read when I was growing up too. I had friends who didn't read. So there are kids who are reading a lot now, and there are kids who don't read a lot now. There were kids who were reading a lot then, and there were don't kids who were not reading them. What they're reading though has changed. They're reading a lot more manga. They're reading a lot more romance. They're reading Colleen Hoover. But then we were reading Jilly Cooper. They're reading Colleen Hoover.
And Mills and Boone, I don't know if you had that. There
Yes,
was like
I
a
had Mills and Boone, so they're reading Colleen Hoover.
yeah.
So I I think people make a lot. uh, I'm not saying they're doing a much ado out of nothing. There is massive change, but they're not writing as much, and that is perhaps the worrying thing, because they're not writing as much. They're not able to structure their thoughts as clearly because there is a distance between them and the laptop. And so in my classes, they do have to write on paper a fair bit. As they get older, they tend to write less on paper, because I can't control that. Um, but that distance is there. They find it hard to translate their spoken English to written English, because of the divide, because they're not writing. That's the only change that I see. But other than that, I think the kids are all right. So
Yeah.
that said, if we give them any more I don't know. At the moment, the kids are fine because they're still very much in the world of writing and reading still. They are not, yes, there's chat GPT and all of that, but their kids are all right. And I teach some very, very smart kids. They are What they are not is I think the only issue with 14, 15, 16-year-old kids now is that the algorithms mean that they don't have exposure to a choice of things, which is the same thing with adults, right? The algorithms mean that they're getting fed more and more of what they like. So they're never given the opportunity to find out what they don't like. And so it's funny, they have so much more choice, but as soon as they get on social media, everything changes.
Yeah.
Because that algorithm tells them what they need to see, and they only see what they're seeing. That didn't happen to us. So when we went into a bookstore, we didn't have more of the same, the more of the same. And but that's a 16, 17-year-old. I think as a parent, you still have control till they're about 14, 15, a little bit. So, yeah.
And that's, like you said, it's for adults as well, right? The kind of
That's the
weird
problem with
blend,
adults. Watch the BBC.
the weird kind of
Everything is curated, right?
kitschy of um, information that we get, which is unfiltered across age groups, right? Like the politics, from the political, and I mean that at the vastest stage, from the political to the deeply small things like the hobbies you have. You know, you maybe watch kinetic sand videos more than, I don't know, reading videos, for instance. The very, very deeply niche and
Yeah.
personal. Everything is such a weird blend.
Yeah. And I think
As
there's too much confirmation bias.
Yes, there is. So, do
Too much
you,
confirmation bias.
is that something you, both as a writer and a writing coach of, um, like a very, I would say, impressionable age of
Yeah.
people, right? Does that become part of conversation at any level? Do you have these conversations?
Yeah, because what happens is I give them books that they might not otherwise read. So we have reading. I use a lot of texts to teach. Um, there are there's still I don't go. I have 16-year-olds. They have very clear ideas about what they like, what they don't like. Books they read, books they don't read. My classes are creative writing classes, which means that they're built to develop your vocabulary and get you a good handle on grammar, which on proper on not school technical grammar, but grammar that you can use. And obviously the imagination. How do you synesthesia, etc. Kids love it. It's just that because once they have access to more books than they would have had otherwise, they get to see the world a little differently. That said, like we're doing the Night Diary, which is a book about the partition. We're doing A Girl Who Drank the Moon. They have more diverse characters. I am careful that I don't, but I have to also be careful that they're age appropriate books. Uh, Age appropriateness is very big now, and understandably we have to be a little careful. Which was never a big deal when I was growing up. We got anything, we went to the library, no one told us could read and what we can't. But unfortunately for these kids, everyone's telling them what they can and can't read. I get it to a large extent. I don't think you should be reading It by Stephen King if you are not ready for it. It can damage. It's not, it can't damage you, but I don't think you should reading a 13-year-old or 14-year-old should read It by Stephen King. I don't think you should. I don't think you're mentally ready for it. But it's a brilliant book, right? Which you should read when you're 18, 19 to truly, genuinely enjoy Stephen King at his best. So yes, I think we do have good libraries, we do have good schools. One of the other great issues that we have, and I don't, since you have time, and is the problem of actual English. Today, English is probably the biggest caste barrier, right? Uh, I I need to be working with an organization called Udan. I did some work with them. I haven't had time to go back to them. Where you have this massive divide where the children who speak English at home and who have English as the currency, and the children who don't have English as the currency, there's a huge divide on the jobs you can get, on the jobs that you have access to, on the on the life that you have access to. How do you bridge that? Yeah.
On the internet you have access to, like, how divided by language the internet can get. We're so immune and blind to the very fact that if I am reading something in English and the same thing in Hindi or Gujarati, I'm just going to perceive it and take it in a very different way. And I don't think we recognize it enough as a society.
I think we're just so vast. The
It's so
issue is
vast.
vast that I don't know where that is going to be. So when I do so I'm teaching very privileged children, and then and I go teach not privileged children. It's a very different experience. And then you realize, and you're saying, what is this? I think the language in English is probably your biggest currency. And how do you, so that's a whole different conversation.
And such a circle, right? Because you cannot quite learn or get go beyond rote learning English till you have a foundational sense of language in your own mother language as well, or a foundational, you're like, your roots are very, very strong in either language. They have to be strong linguistic
For
roots.
instance, if you ask my daughter what her mother tongue is, it's going to be English.
For
We
sure.
don't speak anything else.
Yeah, but like, and I say this always, that I was taught English in Gujarati, which is why I was able to build a very strong foundation of it that went beyond rote learning, and being able to feel in that language. That's the only way I can differentiate. But being able to understand and feel those emotions in a language that was at that time not my home language. But and that circle is back and forth. Like, what do you focus on first? Do you focus on mother language first, but then delay English, or you just give English for the sake of it and then
Then
let
what
them
happens
figure it out?
when all the jobs are in English?
Yeah, and so it's such a like
Big
catch
issue.
22 situation.
It's a massive catch-22.
Yeah.
And so you have a, so where does it leave you in terms of which language you're really fluent in?
And you have to be fluent in one, I feel.
Fluent in one.
Be so
Now,
powerful, like the grammar, syntax, those structures have to be so like internalized, at least one language. Then switching to the other is a piece of cake. But we are switching between two worlds and half baked of both languages.
that is a massive issue.
Massive issue. But you are, I feel like, hidden imagination, this is a concept, like, it's so important that you're bringing that to children, because stuff like introducing children to books that are outside of their confirmation bias, stuff like forcing them to write longhand because you see the value and benefit of it in the long term.
I do, but I think that I have this conversation with people. My issue is I am unable to articulate why there is a benefit. I can't. The benefit is so subtle.
Yes.
That you can't articulate. I'm unable to articulate the benefit, right? So when you can't, but I do see it in my own child. I see the difference when she writes on paper and what she's able to formulate on paper versus what she can do on a laptop. And she's only 8 years old. So there is
Perhaps it's almost as if the parents need this more so that they can impart it on one child to one child.
my parents have so much going on. It's tough. It's tough, and that's why they outsource it to me.
And you are, I mean, in good hands, I would say.
So that's the Hidden Imagination Academy, and that runs for grade 2, grade 3, grade 4, grade 5, grade 6, and there's some adult and some couple of adults who want to publish books. So it's a mentoring program.
Oh, lovely. So do you just work with like batches of students, also one-on-one in require?
I do both. I work with batches of students and I work one-on-one. One-on-one are either for remedial or they want to excel. Or yeah. So I have kids who say very, very who are very driven and say we just want to be the best in our class.
Okay.
Right. The best. We want a 7 on 8. This and very driven children who want to publish books, who want to write longhand stories and have the stamina at such a young age to write. I couldn't have done it. So
Yeah.
very driven. Yeah.
Yeah.
On the other hand, you have kids who can't read and write very well, and so
Work with.
primarily from because yeah, for many reasons, and so yeah, that's it.
That's lovely. Coming back to, of course, your writing and your books. What's like one's just released? Do you have a plan for the next few?
I have a sort of supernatural gothic thriller that I'm trying to finish, adult one, that I'm currently selling at the moment. So being that should ideally be finished and published this year. Um, uh, I'm not going to. The series is a long meandering series. I don't have any end game for it at the moment. I like the world a lot, so I don't see where it's going to end. I'm just going to take it until I find an end for it. I like the world. Its world took a lot of time to build. So I'm very deep in the world and I feel like the world has so much more to it. Um uh and so that's one. Um Beyond that, writing for TV shows. I have pitched them as well. Um, I am keen to do I have been working on a podcast called Writers on Writing with some friend writers, because there are a lot of people who I think people there's no I've always find that so conversations like this, for instance, are great for readers, but they are not but writers have very specific questions, other writers. So like for instance, there are great romance writers like Anjali Bajit, asking her specific nuances of her writing, very useful to people who write that genre.
True, true. Um,
So
Fun fact: before we were Purple Pencil Project, we were called On Writing, and that like our whole idea at the time, or stuff we used to do at the time, was talk to writers about writing.
I think so.
Fantastic.
Yeah, yeah. So I love readers, all authors. And in Litfest, readers will find it boring. When writers talk about specific parts about writing, readers find it boring. Because they don't need to know that. That's like, putting a bench together. Unless you're a carpenter, you're not going to be interested in what type of screw you use or what type of wood you use. The person's not very interested, right? So it's the
Yeah.
same thing. The toolbox, so really talking about the toolbox a little bit. That's something I'm working on, and that's it. Those are the
That's it, you say. But amazing. I'm going to put links to all your books for everyone who's watching. This is mostly, but all the links to her books as well as the academy, the Hidden Imagination Academy, is going to be in the details, and we're going to talk about it on socials, etc. But thank you so much. We've had such a luxurious chat, I want to say. Has been
yes,
such a pleasure connecting with you
yes,
on so many levels, and we've so many
yes.
things that we have like in share thoughts about. So I'm very very happy to have been like finally gotten to
Let,
speaking with you.
yes, let me know if you need anything from me, and I'll be happy to collaborate with you on
Absolutely.
anything.
Thank you everyone, and
Thank you. Thank you. Bye bye.